Welcome to Australian Hunger. I'm your host Ben. On today's show, I've got an interview with a shoegaze dream pop band, Blush Response, coming out of Adelaide. Not necessarily what I would define under the main kind of selling point or mantra or core brand proposition of this podcast, but the great thing about having your own podcast is you can basically do whatever you want. And if you're a fan of shoegaze, but you run a heavy metal podcast, essentially, you can still include them. So that's what I'm going to do. Blush Response. Really, really great debut album. That coming up soon. But before then, I want to talk a little bit about politics. Something I have an interest in, something I don't necessarily try to introduce that much, but I'm sure it's come up quite a bit, let's be honest. The reason I'm bringing it up is that there were a bunch of vegans protesting in Melbourne Central Business District. That's kind of like it's difficult to define, so Melbourne is a big city, there's lots of suburbs, but the urban area where the high-rises are, that's what we call the Central Business District. So there was a protest there. It caused quite a bit of disruption to one of the sort of central entrances / streets on our Central Business District. Caused quite a bit of disruption to the trams, which is one of the primary forms of public transportation around the city. They were trying to promote a movie, bring attention to their cause, and I'm all in favour of people getting disruptive, getting involved, being activists, but the problem I have with this particular form of protest is I don't think it served that particular cause very well. The primary problem I think vegans have is that people think they're fucking weirdos. And some of them are, some of them aren't. And even though I think their cause is an incredibly legitimate one, unfortunately one which I don't really have the moral fortitude to follow up with, I think it's something that really holds them back. And essentially the main consequence of this protest was for people to dislike them slightly more. And I think when we're talking about the way people actually process politics, is it's incredibly emotional and not very deep. So if what we want people to do is take our issue seriously, and they're only going to process at a kind of an emotional level and they don't like us, I think it is a very poor strategy to do something which makes them dislike you more. So, that out of the way. Where this comes into music is there's a bunch of bands which write about politics to varying degrees. And I often wonder, to what extent do they think they're doing something? Is it just something they're interested in and they want to tell a story about? Or is it some form of political activism? Because if it's some form of political activism, I feel very much the same way, in that it's a very ineffective way of going about it. And if it isn't, it seems odd. And I say this as someone who, like basically everyone who's sort of in the metal community and is in kind of the media, even if they don't release music, dabbles in music and would definitely want to release sort of music which has themes, concepts, lyrics which relate to politics. But I think it is a weird, odd thing that politics, social issues, are supposed to be this serious thing which we're trying to move forward on, make some progress, get towards some sort of goal. Yet, if you're not taking it seriously, it's not an activism thing, it's sort of just in your song. I don't know, it is a weird thing how these kind of very important issues which have real-world implications, have real-world things that drive them forward, real-world people who are actually interested in them, and it's kind of just part of a song. Like, it's theoretically just there for entertainment value. I don't know where I'm going with that. It's just a thought I had. And again, that's the benefit of having podcasts. You can just do whatever you want. And so, maybe I should have already thought that one, but oh well, I've done it. So Alister Douglas, man behind Adelaide band Blush Response, and like quite a few bands I've talked to, it sort of started off as a one-man band, but it's sort of grown into something more, and he's been able to form a a band around it, a live band, and perhaps something that appears to be becoming more of a full band, which is really, really exciting. So he released an album last year called Hearts Grow Dull, and it's really great. I think it's just an incredibly great example of that style, and it really resonated with me, with that part of me which really enjoys that type of music. The songs I play during the interview are Cruel, Fall Apart, and Still Life, all from the album Hearts Grow Dull. This is Alister Douglas from Blush Response. It's funny, so I was doing a bit of research, going through Facebook, checking for interviews and all that sort of stuff, and there's actually a really, really in-depth feature on you. I haven't got it in front of me where it was written in, but yeah, that sort of, I think that goes through a lot of your sort of the band in depth, some of your thinking, so I'd probably recommend up the top that people check that out. Indie 30, so yeah. I don't want to cover too much of that stuff and be too repetitive. To start off with, what kind of attracts you to the music that Blush Response plays?
I think I've always been drawn to music with kind of like a dreamier sound to it. I've never been a particularly confident vocalist, and I think the attraction of being able to bury vocals under guitar textures appeals to me a lot. Shoegaze in particular, I think at its like core, they're kind of like the short, catchy pop songs that you kind of just cover with a lot of noise. And I like that idea of taking something that's, short and catchy and concise and just making it a little bit abrasive and a little bit uncomfortable at times.
One thing, it's certainly not my type of music. Like, I like shoegaze, but like when you sort of take away some of the fuzz, for some reason it sort of loses my interest. But you definitely are more involved in that kind of region of styles. Talk a little bit about, I don't know, what is, when you say pop, what is pop?
I mean, when I say pop, I don't mean sort of, chart pop or sort of electronic pop that you would hear on like commercial radio. I'm talking sort of really traditional song structures, verse, chorus, bridge, end kind of thing. Songs that sort of live and die by their melodies and their hooks. Songs that don't sort of get lost in their own grandeur and sort of. It sounds weird to say, I've limited patience for the psychedelic genre because I'm not about sort of 9-minute to 15-minute jams that kind of just meander around. I like my songs to be really concise. And I guess that's what draws me to it.
Now, you were in a number of bands. I'm not sure about kind of the exact timeline, but you've been in a number of bands over the years. Why did you want to do something solo? I know that you've also got Furs, F-I-R-S as well. You were sort of, Blush Response and Furs were sort of dueling at the time when Blush Response really sort of took off in 2014. Talk a little bit about why you kind of wanted to release stuff on your own.
I guess it came off the back of playing in other people's bands for, I don't know, like 6 or 7 years. And a lot of those bands were very sort of auteur focused. So it'd be, I'd be joining a band and playing the parts that were already written. It was great fun. I really enjoyed playing some of those bands like 20th Century Graduates. I was also in Wild Oats, which was more of a collaborative affair. There's a bunch of them, but I think it took me a while to work up the confidence to actually perform my own music, especially live. I had a little sort of run of releasing stuff onto MySpace and never really promoting it and doing anything, just letting it exist in the ether. But it wasn't until sort of, when Furs came out, I think Furs was like 2013, 2014, that I was really putting my own name to music. And I think that just was the confidence that I sort of got from playing in other bands over the years. And I just wanted to do something of my own eventually.
Where'd the name Blush Response come from?
It's a track off the Blade Runner soundtrack, which is a favorite film of mine.
Why did you choose that one?
I think I just like the way that words sound together and the way they look written. I have a thing about the way words look when they're written. If like a word looks ugly to me, I just don't want to be associated with it in a creative sense. But also, I guess, I don't know if it came after I chose it, but I've kind of taken on a second meaning in as much as like a blush response is something that you get when you're, embarrassed or awkward or, that kind of emotion. And to me, performing this music it did make me blush a bit, I guess. That's a bit cheesy to say, but like it was coming from a kind of place of awkwardness and a bit of lack of confidence. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's something that came after the fact.
So you released the two EPs in 2014. Talk a little bit about how they come about and sort of what place they were coming from.
So the two EPs, the first one was Telltale, and that was in February, and then Dead Air was in August of the same year. I was doing Telltale was kind of like a bit of like a distraction or escape from the Furs EP that I was doing at the time called Sweet Nothings, and I was kind of running myself in circles with that Furs EP, not really making much progress. And then I had some computer issues, and Furs is all electronic based, so as soon as there's computer issues, everything goes downhill. So I started recording what would be the Telltale EP just as a kind of a way to do something that was really different, just completely guitar based, no synth, real drums. And yeah, I didn't mean for it to become a band, I don't think. And I sort of just put it onto Bandcamp with little fanfare to sort of just put it up there. And it actually got a bit of attention really quickly, which was really encouraging. And that's when I sort of thought that the project might have some legs. And off the back of that, because I was so excited about it, I started recording the next EP pretty much immediately. The first EP was songs I'd had sort of lying around for, a few years, but the second EP was very much written for the band.
In terms of Hearts Grow Dull, so that was released in 2018. An interview I was reading from you talk a little bit about the attraction of EPs, the fact that in having 4 or so songs, it's very hard to put filler in there. You kind of forced to be at your best the entire time. But you also mentioned kind of the obvious attraction of doing a full length. It's kind of just the thing. Why did you eventually decide that, hey, this release is actually going to be a full length?
I think it just felt like the right time. I remember sort of thinking to myself whether I had probably like 5 or so songs at one point, and I was like, should I just make this another EP? And I decided that an album's something I've always wanted to do, like full length and release on vinyl. It's kind of like a bucket list item for me. I thought that if I don't do it now, then it will be probably another several years before I work up the material again to record an album. So it just felt the right time, I think. And the more I sort of investigated the sound and the sort of themes of the album, the more ideas came to me surrounding that. And I just found that I was able to create 10 songs that sort of fit together and felt like they deserved to be an album. It wasn't just putting more songs into a project just for the hell of it to make it an album.
Yeah, that was something that was really interesting that I read, that I think it was Drive and Horizon, you rewrote the music to that because they didn't fit with the rest of the album. Talk a little bit about what that kind of core of the album is, that you were trying to kind of fit those songs into.
Yeah, I think for the album, the direction I wanted to take it was sort of bigger, darker, heavier than the EPs were. And I was sort of conscious when I was writing the music about pushing in that direction. And the original versions of Horizon and Drive were coming off the back of I wouldn't say they're light sounding songs, the EPs, but they were certainly coming off the back of that style. And when I sort of put them in the track list with the other songs, they stuck out a bit. So I went back and pretty much only kept the lyrics, just rewrote the music for something that was more intentionally focused to fit with the album.
Mm-hmm. One thing that really interests me as well was the writing process. Talk a little bit about how you go about that, how the sort of recording and like actual writing process kind of, there's no sort of differentiation, sort of clean differentiation between them.
Yeah, so I guess because up until now, shortly to change, the project has just been me recording and writing by myself. So the process in which I work and sort of come up with the songs and demo them is there's no real. I think bands, when they write, they'll write a bunch of songs, they'll workshop them together, and they'll take them to a studio and they'll do the good versions. With me, because it's just me, I write the parts as I go, and then I sort of tidy up the songs as I go, and then eventually they'll become the good versions. The album deviated from that a bit, as much as once I got to the end of that process, I decided that I wasn't really happy with some of the production decisions I made. So I went back and recorded a large bunch of it again. But I never sort of went, okay, demoing done, album starts now.
Well, one thing that I'm always fascinated by, I've interviewed a few bands who do improv, so they do a lot of improv that kind of means that they're constantly working on the songs and there's sort of a constant ability to kind of go forward ad infinitum. How do you know that a song is complete? What's the quality of it that sort of signals that to you?
It's a hard one to say. I think it's like a law of diminishing returns. The changes you're making, you become very acutely aware that they're either not making much difference or they're making things worse, and they're creating more problems for you. And I think once before I get to that point, I try to call it. And usually for me, if I'm throughout the mixing process, I'm always bouncing out versions of the songs and then listening to them in the car or, before I go to bed or whatever. And if a song gets like a repeat factor for me, like I get to the end of it and I just want to sort of put it on again, I'm pretty confident that the song is done at that point. So I'll sort of let it sit for a while and then I'll come back to it in a few days and then give it another listen and then sign off on it.
In terms of kind of in the middle of the process, like, what are you doing to progress a song forward? Like, we're not at that stage where maybe you have to call it, we're the earlier stage. How are you moving the song forward in, like, hey, I'm it's not there, it will be there eventually. How do you get from point A to point B?
It's like the early demoing process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like it differs from, a writing band in as much as I don't have or haven't exposed myself to the ability to sort of just work through a song organically with people and sort of, start playing and then stop and talk about what needs to change. With me, I'm sort of writing with my computer. So I'll like piece together a rudimentary drum part and I'll just let that run for, 6 minutes or something. And I'll just noodle guitar over that. And then I'll chop up the guitar bits and then I'll find the best bits and then I'll arrange them in some sort of structure and then I'll jam some bass over that. The song doesn't take structure immediately. A lot of it's just recording scraps over pre-recorded parts. So I don't know, to anyone who's more familiar with writing music in a band, it might seem really convoluted and frustrating to sort of have to bounce off a computer, but it's just the way that I've accustomed myself to it, I guess.
Let's talk a little bit more about the home studio that you've got. How did you sort of come to have the proficiency to be able to record by yourself?
Shortly after high school, I was unsure about what I wanted to do, and I enrolled in the SAE diploma in Adelaide. They're like a worldwide audio college, and just learned a lot of the skills from that. I knew a bunch of it already, I guess, from just messing around myself, but that sort of really gave me the framework, I guess, and the theoretical knowledge to produce music myself better than I had been previously. So I have studied it, which helped a lot.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the overall sound of the band, one of the sort of kind of really beautiful things about shoegaze and related kind of musical styles is that they do have that quality of having sort of, pop songs, something kind of a melody underlying, but then they've got this sort of haze, this noise over the top, which brings a whole new dimension about it. How do you kind of navigate the difference between it being kind of an incomprehensible kind of noisy mush and it like not having that quality of noise that you kind of want?
I think you just got to trust your ear a bit. I don't sort of have a formula for it. I just keep adding parts until maybe it's a bit too much and then I pull it back. I like it to be, I think certainly with EPs, I think I went a bit more noisy with the EPs. I liked the fact that you kind of almost feel like you have to squint through the noise to hear the underlying pop sensibilities. I think for the album, I tried to maybe make the pop song and the lyrics and the melodies a little bit more up front. I've had people tell me that I didn't, but I feel like I made them more obvious. So yeah, I think it's just about trusting your ears and you know when things are getting too much, I think.
What is kind of the overall attraction of like that fuzz that I'm not a very good musician, so I don't really have the words to it, but what's the sort of attraction of that kind of, I don't know, thing that it's almost wave-like?
I like volume, like the sheer volume of music, especially when you see it live. There's a real physicality to it, like a real visceral reaction from just hearing really loud guitars. That I really, really like it. It's sort of, you can kind of it gets to the point where you're not just listening to two guitars and a bass, drums obviously, but like two guitars playing individual parts. They kind of start to swell and merge and bleed at the seams, and it creates something more than the sum of the parts. I also really like the genre and associated genres, I guess, because it lets me play loud, obnoxious guitar music without any of the kind of like rock posturing, none of that gross rock and roll attitude. You can kind of just, I don't know, it feels like I can be more honest to who I am while still playing loud, obnoxious rock music. If that makes sense.
That kind of merging of guitars and bass into one, it kind of reminded me. I saw My Bloody Valentine when they came here last, and they have this thing at the end. Did you see them when they came? I don't know.
I did. Yeah, I went to Melbourne to see them.
The noise holocaust at the end, where they play for, what was it, 20 minutes or something?
I think I timed it. I think they were like 16 and a half minutes. During that song, you made me realize they just break into that noise section. They were giving out earplugs at the entrance to the gig, which is, I don't know, responsible. I guess you don't want to have lawsuits of people going deaf, but I had earplugs in for pretty much the whole gig, but I took them out intentionally during that section just to feel for a second that dangerous volume. I only lasted for 10 seconds without them in my ears and put them back in, but just to feel that, like, even with them in, you still felt it in your chest, the sheer volume. It was quite amazing.
So I think it was Without You appeared on the Dead Air EP as well. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Why did you want to include it on the album?
It was probably my favorite from that EP, and I wanted to have that song pressed into vinyl, just purely for on a sentimental level. I like that song, so I wanted it to appear on the vinyl that I pressed. But also thematically, it deals with feelings of isolation and separation from someone close to you, and how you cope with that, and the thought process of how to navigate that situation. I don't know, being vague, but so thematically it fits, but the main reason was I really liked it as a song and I wanted it to be included with this group of songs.
That kind of moves well into my next question. The lyrics, how do you approach them?
Lyrics are a really hard thing for me. They don't come easily to me at all. And if I get any hint of cringe factor from something I'm writing, I'm very quick to sort of turn tail and run from it, I think. So it's often the last thing that is locked down for a song. And it can go one of two ways. Either I can have a really strong idea of what I want to say in a song, and I can essentially write the lyrics without really thinking about the song too much. It's just kind of prose, I guess. Or I can go the other direction and I can have the song finished and I'll essentially sing kind of nonsense mumbled melody over the guitar. And once I've got a melody I'm happy with, I start to think about what I want to say and then what words could fit in those gaps. So it's either very intentional and forethought, or more stream of consciousness and filling in the gaps, I guess. But whichever way I go, I think I have I set myself a high bar in terms of lyrics. I hate cringeworthy lyrics, so yeah, it's really important to me to not do that.
Is that so? The cringe, is that dissatisfaction with them, or fear that other people will view them as cringeworthy? What is that?
Probably equal measure, both, I reckon. I think it's easy to be too overwrought or too earnest or trying to be too poetic sometimes, and I think people can see through that. And I think a lot of these songs sort of came from a place or talked about things that were really personal to me, and that I didn't want to overplay and I didn't want to be melodramatic. And yes, I always had that in mind, and I wanted to write as honestly as I could while still being interesting about it, I guess.
Why did you choose Hearts Grow Dull as the title of the album?
Again, it goes back to the I like the way the words look written, and I like the sound of them when they're said together. But more than that, it kind of summed up to me. There's two parts to it. The song itself typified what I wanted to achieve with the album. That it was like that real swirling, dark, heavy sections contrasted with the lighter, dreamier sections. That was that, dichotomy, I don't know if that's the right word, between the light and the dark and the heavy and the quiet. So that was really important. So that song was like the feature piece. But also the title, Hearts Grow Dull. I've just said I don't like to be too tricky with my wordplay or too cringy, but it came from the twist on the saying, distance makes the heart grow fond. But in my experience, it was distance makes the heart grow dull. And that was kind of the theme for the album, was about distance in relationships. And how that can affect you. So
the album was released nearly a year ago and maybe a week or so.
Yeah, wow, yep. Oh, hang on. April. No, so wait, geez, we are nearly April. Yes, a year ago.
How do you feel about the album sort of a year out? Obviously, there's a little bit of time before that when the album was sort of completed, but it's sort of released to the public, it becomes sort of something different. How do you feel about a year out from the original release?
I don't think my opinion of it has really changed. I'm still really proud of it. I don't listen to it anymore. I think I sort of burnt myself out during the mixing process and shortly after. And then we've been playing songs off the album live since then. So I don't listen to it as much as I used to. But in terms of the way I think about it and how important it is to me, it's still, that's still it'll always be my first album. Very happy that was the one that it was.
Earlier in the interview, you mentioned that the band sort of function is changing a bit. Talk a little bit about that.
I guess, as I previously said, the process up until now has mostly been me. I mean, we had Emily Retzis, who was the original bass player, played bass in Cruel off the record, and I got Brody Brummer from Flying Colours to play guitar on that song too. So it's not just me, but up until now it's been pretty much me. But moving forward, we're trying to make it more of a band affair. We've just recorded 2 songs we're going to be using for a split with a band from the US called Warm. And the songwriting process was it's kind of the midway, so it was mostly me for the songwriting process. But when we actually took it to record it, we've got Walter and Joe and Zach playing all their parts, and there was a bit of leeway in the writing, and Zach came up with some more guitar textures and stuff. So it's going to sound more like a band affair, I think.
What sort of drove you to play this music live? Like, what's the appeal of playing music live that kind of wanted you to, actually, put in the effort to make it a live band?
I guess live music and me have a weird relationship. I've done it for so long and I really love it. I find it rewarding. But at the same time, it can terrify me. So I'm attracted to and retreat from it, sometimes in equal measure. But I think it just made sense. I mean, all the bands I played in previously, it's just what you did. You wrote music and you played it live. And I guess because I'd been, recording stuff for myself and just not playing it live, I guess I thought now was the time if I'm going to do a proper bands play live. And certainly with the style of song, you can mix something to sound big and loud, but there's no real replacement for hearing that live and seeing people play it and hearing it come off the stage and out of the PA. So it just made sense.
What do you try to do when you play live? Like, there's sort of maybe an ideal way to play live, or there's something you're trying to achieve when you play a show. Like, what is that?
With Blush Response, I guess the challenge is there's so many layers in the recordings that the challenge is finding the right arrangements to do the album justice. I know there are bands that really like to push the boundaries of their live performance and give something, do new reworkings of the song stuff, but that's not really what I've been about up until now. It's more just about achieving the songs as best as I can, as true as I can live. And yeah, just making it a really, concise, tight experience, I guess. I don't think about it too much. I think if I think about it too much, I start to freak myself out. And yeah, so I just want to play the songs for people to experience live. I think that's it.
Are you involved in any other bands or projects at the moment?
I've just started playing drums for a band in Adelaide called Little Dust, with Alex Dearman, who used to play guitar in Blush Response, and Larissa Perry, who's an old friend of mine. We've played in bands for a long, long time together. I haven't sort of officially joined the band, but I've been playing with them. It's been a lot of fun, because for the past few years, it's just been Blush Response. It's just been my thing. So yeah, it's good to have another musical outlet.
I want to ask you a couple of sort of last personal questions, about you and sort of your music, or I guess music in general, really. When did you sort of start properly listening to music, like listening to music that really resonated with you?
In terms of my current taste, I would have year 12, final year high school, I think was the year that I kind of attribute my current taste to. I mean, before then I was listening to other genres that I don't sort of identify with as closely anymore, like hip hop, some like electronic-y music, drama-based stuff. But in terms of alternative music, I think I found a Jeff Buckley CD in my parents' drawer in year 12, and I listened to that and I fell in love with it. And then that led on to, Elliott Smith and Bright Eyes. And that's kind of, year 12 was the point where I'd sort of say I found my current taste and became, properly obsessed with music and the making and creation, digesting of it.
You play just about all the instruments in the album and the EPs. Why did you, when you were sort of learning musical instruments at a young age, why did you branch out?
I'm not sure. I think I just liked a lot of aspects. I started learning piano when I was quite young, and I did that up until middle school. But I lost interest when I wasn't really into classical music at the time. So I stopped playing piano, and I think I just tried to find the next instrument I wanted to play. I started playing bass in a band and then dabbled with guitar and drums. And I sort of found that I got a lot of satisfaction out of playing all the different things. A lot of musicians get, satisfaction out of being really good at their one instrument. They become a virtuoso. They practice and they do their, drill scales and stuff, and they get really good at that one instrument. But that's never really what I've been about. Maybe that's a cop-out, but I always feel that I play music as a songwriter more than a guitarist or more than a drummer. I'm not excellent at one given instrument, so I'm not confident at one given instrument. I just know enough about a lot of them to write the songs that I want to write, I guess. Does that make sense?
So you play guitar and obviously you sing for Blush Response when you're playing live, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why? So our vocals are kind of obvious, but why guitar when you're on stage?
Guitar, I guess, is to me the characteristic sound of Blush Response. So I wanted to do that myself and deliver that myself, so I could achieve it in the way that it sounded on the records. Because I think the vocals and the guitar are sort of the signature sound, I guess.
When did you start singing?
I think I probably first started singing in bands in 2010-ish, I guess. I think I was playing in a band called Wild Oats and another band called Alphabet. And Alphabet was like a 60s jazz pop group, and with these really amazing musicians, a lot of whom had graduated from the conservatorium here, so they were like amazing jazz musicians. And joining that band, I was not a confident singer, but they pushed me to sing harmonies and sing some lead parts, and so I think I can attribute that band to being the point where I started to become confident and certainly become better at being a vocalist. But it's not something I've always been confident with, and I'm still don't consider myself a singer, I guess.
Last question. What have you been listening to, watching, or reading lately?
Oh, Man, what have I been listening to lately? That's a great question. Grievo, this band from Texas, released an album last year that I've had on heavy repeat. I've gone back to Autolux's Future Perfect album recently. I've been smashing that. Watching, I just started the new season of VOA, which I'm really excited about. I really like season 1. And I finally submitted to the US office after years of swearing that it would not be as good as the UK version. I've been really enjoying it. I've been marathoning that a little bit.
That was Still Life. Before that we heard Fall Apart, and the first track was Cruel, all from Hearts Grow Dull by Blush Response. Thanks again to Alister for chatting to me. Before I leave you, I want to recommend an album. I don't know whether this should be sort of a segment where I try and branch out, I try to recommend interesting things, different things. I feel like I have recommended a lot of the same things, but I mean, that's kind of the music that really attracts me and resonates with me. So I'll have to think about how I actually do this. A band, a one-person band, like many of them are, which has attracted me recently, is Sadness. Released 3 albums in the last few months. In particular, the album Circle of Veins. It combines just a really atmospheric soundness with really loud and melodic choruses. One of the things that really fascinated me is the multiple voices that are used, which you don't necessarily find that much in black metal unless it's some sort of death metal hardcore influenced gang vocals. But no, this is multiple voices kind of singing a chorus. Really, really fascinating. And the fact that it includes sort of the typical instrumentation with electronics, I love that approach. It just means that you're not kind of limiting yourself. You're widening your possibilities. So there's 3 albums there for you to check out. My Sadness, but in particular, Circle of Veins, I really, really enjoyed. I have an interview coming up with a band which perfectly complements Blush Response, Horizonous, death metal band. So that later in the week. But until then, thanks for joining me. You can catch me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all at AusHunger. That's AUS Hunger. You can send me an email, australianhunger@gmail.com. Bye.